Eh bien, merci beaucoup et merci pour l'invitation à parler avec vous et d'entendre ces discours si intéressants. Je m'excuse, je vais parler en anglais assez lentement, mais je peux répondre en français plus tard. What I'm going to talk about very much follows from the previous presentations. I will talk about collective intelligence, but in particular how it may help answer some of the paradoxes of science now. In one respect, science is thriving globally. There is more money invested from Korea to the US to China to France than ever before. But there are also clear weaknesses in the R&D system globally. A real weakness in terms of engaging with the public, as we heard, a surprising lack of innovation in its own methods and very little application of experimental method to R&D itself. Often insufficient use of data, and as I will show, some parts of the science system not embedded in practice. So I will start with a bit on collective intelligence. Primarily, I am talking here about the use of digital technologies to mobilize human intelligence at scale, as we have just been hearing. This has a long history. You may not know the mid-19th century Oxford English Dictionary used tens of thousands of volunteers to analyze the language. Almost everything Wikipedia later used as a method was prefigured in the 1860s. And there are many, many other examples. Now, of course, we have a whole array of tools and databases, some of which have been described, from maths to medicine to science, trying to orchestrate intelligence at scale. In my organization, we have been attempting to develop new theories of collective intelligence. Some are described in my book, which was published by Princeton University Press this year. And in some respects, our simple hypothesis is that intelligence at a collective level, like intelligence at the individual level, includes all of these elements, but it's the combination of these elements which leads to truly effective intelligence. And many of the weaknesses, perhaps, of experiments in the last 20 or 30 years is they are experiments only at one level, only observation, only memory, only analysis, rather than the combination which makes collective intelligence powerful. And as I said, this becomes part of the answer to what I call the missing habits in research and development. So missing habit number one is listening. Monsieur Vallerand mentioned the Longitude Prize from the 18th century in England. 4 years ago, we reinvented the Longitude Prize with a committee with some of the same members, including the President of the Royal Society and the Astronomer Royal. But this time, we worked with the media to allow the public to choose what should be the priority task for a new Longitude Prize. And they voted for antibiotic resistance, I think wisely, as a fundamental scientific challenge of now. And if you're interested, this prize is now live with 200 teams globally competing. Artificial intelligence is another field where listening is very important because the public all over the world are very frightened of AI and may resist AI in the way they resisted genetically modified crops and nuclear power. We have just in the UK created a new government body, a Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, to systematically engage the public in detailed conversations about AI in healthcare, in policing, in different fields. And as others have said, I think citizen science is part of the answer to public engagement. Probably our best example is Zooniverse, Galaxy Zoo, which has 1 million people volunteering to analyze astronomy and also to do things like counting penguins in the Antarctic, which people find a very addictive practice. These are a few of the other examples live from our field. Where this, for me, becomes most interesting, and here I very much pick up on Monsieur Raveau's presentation, is in healthcare, where we have examples not just of patient groups analyzing data, but beginning to become a collective intelligence themselves, pooling data, commissioning research, using findings from research in their own treatment management. And I think this goes one step beyond patients like me, which is a quite ambiguous project. It is a private company, mainly funded by pharmaceutical companies, not owned by the patients. These other examples, like in Parkinson's, are more genuinely collective versions of collective intelligence. And we've also run experiments in the UK on dementia, creating collectives of people and their carers with dementia to share data, organize research, and so on. This remains a field in evolution, not quite mature, but very exciting in its potential to turn, as was said before, groups of patients into agents of knowledge creation. The other issue here is the harvesting of knowledge from many sources. So some parts of the R&D system are good at this, other parts are very bad. Most of our R&D funding does not use the new methods of harvesting. We run a challenge prize center using the sorts of challenges, défis, which were discussed earlier. And one example is today in my office is the judging for a Toyota Mobility Foundation prize, which we manage, trying to find artificial intelligence informed alternatives to wheelchairs. And these will be presented at the Tokyo Paralympics. But the key point is this is finding innovations and new insights from all over the world, not just from the most high-status universities or research centers. And this is where these methods become powerful. NASA in the US is a very good example of this, having in some ways turned itself inside out, using a whole array of crowdsourcing methods for everything from spacesuits to software to recruitment videos. We have not persuaded our own main research funding bodies to use most of these methods, but they are really a mindset of open science and harvesting. And then the other surprising missing habit, I think, is experimentation in how R&D is organized and funded. The methods used primarily now in France, in the UK, in the US, are almost identical to in the 1950s and 60s. And there has been very little systematic experimentation. We run with 12 governments, something called the Innovation Growth Lab, which runs randomized controlled trials in government support for entrepreneurship and business innovation. And we are just beginning to apply this to R&D, to science organization. But in a way, what is surprising is how unusual this is. Just as it is unusual for universities to apply the scientific method to their own practices, the R&D world applies R&D methods to everyone else except themselves. I'm being slightly provocative, but only slightly. And then finally, the use of data. So one of the things we are very excited by is how new data tools can inform the practice of science and research. Here you probably can't quite see, some of our methods have looked at how to analyze ecosystems of innovation in places. What are the relationships, the flows of knowledge, the flows of money, who is useful to who? And these nearly always show patterns which were not in the minds of the key decision makers, the funding bodies, the policy makers, so we're the pinnacle. And it is only through scraping the web, combining data sets, that one begins to see true emergent patterns, the emergence of new subdisciplines, new clusters, new subsectors. And in a month or two, we are going to launch one other aspect of this, which is a new search engine for science and innovation, which I think may be of interest. And this is called, this is one example of using it for artificial intelligence in health. And we call this Clio. And where it's interesting is it combines, in some ways, more classic searching within research databases and science, but with also methods of searching through the web, through social innovation sources, through multiple data sets to get comprehensive patterns of trends, the geographies of innovation, and to dig deep into specifics. For example, again, this is for AI and health, where it is being applied, where some potential gaps may be, in order to inform a more intelligent system applying collective intelligence to itself, so that a researcher in any field can situate their work in the context of many other dimensions. So let me now focus on collective intelligence as a discipline which can be useful for helping these. About a few months ago, we launched a new Center for Collective Intelligence Design. And this is to create a place for focusing on the practical skills and the academic skills for doing collective intelligence well. And we would love to have collaborators in France. We have just this week published a global scan of the current related research fields. We use machine learning to analyze, say, a very large population of research projects globally and to see their relationships. One of the findings here, in fact, was that the citizen science field is very detached in research terms from other parts of the collective intelligence field. And so we are looking at new ways of cross-pollinating between these related but distinct fields, from use of sensor data, collective intelligence in health, collective intelligence in democracy, and so on. And this is another diagram of how the different disciplines are working in this space, with still computer science very much dominating. And so if you're interested, there's, I think, a major task of academic research orchestration in collective intelligence. And we have just a few months ago launched a grants program, a global grants program for research projects in collective intelligence, which, again, we would love to find funding partners for. But what I want to concentrate on is another aspect of this, which we think is crucial to the future of this field, which is what we call intelligence assemblies. That is to say, where are there the examples which combine together observation and data, models and predictions, analyses, memory, and feed that then into action and learning, whether it's by patient groups or policymakers or researchers. And our hypothesis is that the biggest value will often come from the connecting of multiple elements together. We see this in the technology world through things like Google Maps, which I used to get here this morning, which is an interesting assembly of multiple elements. Google did not have most of the capacities needed for Google Maps. They had to buy many companies. They had to use open APIs to get many to design websites using Google Maps. And through Google Map Maker, they mobilized the public to fill in the missing bits of the maps. So the business world is thinking hard about intelligence assemblies, and we think this will be crucial to the future of science. We can see fragments of this already. So in the ecological field, experiments like the Planetary Skin Institute of NASA and Cisco, in Europe, Copernicus, these bring together some of the elements, observation, analyses, often predictive algorithms, but I would argue these are still quite weak in having a feedback loop to practice. They're not used very much by the people managing forests or fish stocks in the seas. And so they are incomplete intelligence assemblies, and therefore the science isn't in fact used and isn't refreshed and fed through practice. A very different example in medicine is AIME, Artificial Intelligence for Medical Epidemiology, which is a small startup trying to combine data feeds on epidemics, sometimes generated by citizens, sometimes by health workers, using algorithms to predict the potential spread of epidemics, and then feeding that back into public health systems to respond more quickly. Malaysia, Brazil are some of the countries where this is happening. And this is a pointer to, again, a future assembly which links data, machine learning, but also collective intelligence to make epidemic response more intelligent. Another example I like is MetaSub, which is a mapping of the state of the microbiome of bacteria in subway systems, metro systems around the world, in order to spot emergent patterns of antibiotic resistance. This is the New York subway map, showing multiple kinds of plague on the New York subway. I'm sure the Paris Metro has no... Il n'y a pas de peste sur le métro, mais il y a de peste sur le métro à New York. And they have now about, I think, 80 cities around the world beginning to combine data to spot this enormously serious threat to the world, which is the rise of new kinds of resistant strains. So I hope this gives a flavor of a view of where science may go. So I would like to see at least some of the frontiers of science becoming in new ways better at engaging with the public, willing to have conversations with them about priorities for research spending, to have conversations about the detailed application issues around genomics or artificial intelligence. And I think there is a new set of methods emerging for having intelligent conversations about science and technology, which are very different from opinion polls or very different from surveys, but also very different from the assumption the public should just be grateful. I would like to see more experiment applied to science itself. And one question for France or any country is, where is the R&D program on R&D? Where are there the systematic experiments on new methods of funding, organizing labs, organizing pipelines? I think this is a global gap, and it risks leading to stagnation of science, as has happened in fields like pharmaceuticals, where, as many of you know, the productivity of pharmaceutical research has been a straight line downwards now for 50 years, mainly because of a failure of innovation directed to its methods. I think we should see science becoming more data-driven. We are incredibly lucky to live at a time when we have extraordinary new data tools to use. And above all, I would love to see more and more science, as many of the speakers have shown today, from fisheries to medicine, to land management, embedded in collective intelligence. And this is, I think, a possibility within our grasp. Thank you. That's it.